Welcome to Get Rich, the podcast that helps you do just that. Get rich and stay rich. Hey, I'm Molly Benjamin. I'm the founder of Ladies Finance Club, one of Australia's largest financial education platforms for women. But before I started helping thousands of women take control with their money, I was a hot financial mess when it came to my own finances. And not the fun kind of hot, more like crying in a supermarket wondering where all my money went kind of hot. But here's the thing, if I can go from financial mess to owning a share portfolio, investing in property and building wealth, then you can too. My mission is simple, to make women rich. Because when we have financial freedom, we have choices, confidence, and control over our future. Every week on Get Rich, I sit down with some of the best experts in the industry to break down how we can all start investing, growing our money, and creating long-term financial security without the jargon, boring bits, or overwhelm. Because when women get rich, we don't just change our lives, we change the world. So if you're ready to start making some smart money moves, hit that subscribe button and let's get rich together. Hey, it's Molly here. Now, before we dive in, I want to give a shout out to our awesome sponsor, Investor Kit. At Ladies Finance Club, we are all about helping women crush financial independence, and property investing is a really smart way to do this. But let's be real, figuring out the right location, avoiding costly mistakes, and dealing with agents, it's a lot. That's where Investor Kit comes in. They've been named Australia's Buyer Agency of the Year in 2023 and 2024, and they're here to look after you, the property investor. They know the markets inside out, back every move with solid data, and take care of the tricky stuff like research, negotiation, and even connecting you with top property managers. Whether it's your first investment property or you're building your portfolio, InvestorKit makes it simple and stress-free. Big thanks to them for supporting this podcast. Visit investorkit.com.au to learn more. Emma Edwards, so excited to have you on the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here with you, Molly.
Awesome. So I've got this question for you, and I know you do a lot around behavioral finance. So my question to you, Emma, is why do so many of us spend even when we know we shouldn't? Like, what is going on with our brains?
So many things. And I think that answer kind of changes with time. You know, what I might have said, I wasn't doing this 10 years ago, but if I were doing this 10 years ago, the foundations of it would be the same. As human beings, we're not actually wired to delay gratification. So all of this, you have to wait before you buy things, or wait before, it's the same with eating food, right? I don't want to wait before I eat cake. Like, if I want it, I'm going to have it. We're not wired to do that. Some people are naturally better at it than others. But kind of in more modern times, that's really become, our natural wiring aside, it's become even harder to resist temptation because there is just stuff everywhere and everything is shoppable. And, in my book, I talk about how you used to be able to see a picture of somebody wearing something and just be like, that's nice. And that was the end of it. And you wouldn't know where it was from, and you wouldn't be able to send them a message, and you wouldn't be able to tap the link to go to the checkout page. And now it is just so streamlined that you can just tap the picture, or if they haven't said, you can reverse image search. And not only do you have the, means to purchase that thing, you're on the checkout page, there's all these new mechanisms now where if you haven't got the money, don't worry, you can PayPal Pay in 4, or you can put it on credit, or your Apple Pay is right there. It's just all too easy. So there's the us stuff, and then there's the external stuff as well. Yeah,
and I think that invisible spending, although it's so convenient, it feels like it's not real money. And even tapping, you're like, oh yeah, boom, boom, boom. It feels like it's actually not real money.
No, you're not connected to your balance going down in the same way. And if you don't check your bank account, which a lot of people don't, you don't really get that parting with the money in the same kind of way. It's just like see, want, own. And that the duration between those steps has become so short.
Yeah. And we're just constantly being marketed to non-stop, like whether it's online or it's like just in everyday society, like we're just constantly getting these marketing messages pushing at us all the time. Like you can see how hard it is actually to not spend. And I totally feel for people when they're struggling with spending.
And it's one of those things I think we don't want to admit. Nobody really wants to, because of the shopaholic trope that women have been slathered with for years. Nobody wants to admit that they have a problem with spending or that their spending isn't where they want it to be. And so we avoid the fact of it as well as avoiding dealing with it. And, you know, we're marketed to, especially as women, there's a lot of data that suggests that men and women actually spend similar amounts on discretionary things. But for women, there's this whole other element where a lot of what we spend on are not actually things that we have chosen ourselves. They're things that we've been conditioned to want. Yeah. And it's why when I talk to people about spending, I often say, let go of this thing that you're buying things you don't need. Like, let go of the need thing. Explore looking at things that you don't actually want. Because where, yes, men, you know, they buy golf clubs and sports memberships and all that stuff. They haven't been conditioned to want that stuff in the same way we've been conditioned to want makeup and clothing and, you know, all that kind of feminine, frivolous stuff. Yeah. There's so much more conditioning going on for us. Absolutely. And we don't own those decisions.
No. I saw the other day, and it was an eyelash primer. And
what's that?
I was like, men have an all-in-one body shampoo, and we have eyelash primers. Like, come on, what is this?
I think this all the time about, like, even getting ready to do a podcast. I'm like, God, if I was a man, I would have got up 5 minutes ago. I've been, you know, putting on my foundation and highlighter and setting up my light and everything. You know, the light's technical, but, you know, it's just a different world.
It is, and it's that headspace that takes up as well. And this is completely off topic, but something I just thought was interesting that I noticed the other day. So I've been single for quite a while, and I've recently met someone. And the crazy thing that happened was after I met this person, I felt like I had so much more headspace because I've been dedicating so much time to looking for someone, to dating, to, you know, and it is the keeping us, not that I'm letting myself go now, but like it's just that constant thought. And then when I met the guy I'm seeing at the moment and it's getting quite serious, I actually am more creative. I've got more headspace. I'm less, and I'm just like, oh, I hate that. That's taken up so much of my headspace. It shouldn't have. But yeah, it was just an interesting thing I reflected on the other day.
That's really interesting. But it's true because you're thinking about how you're presenting, like wherever you are. If you are looking to meet somebody, you're thinking, well, I've got to put my makeup on. It's not that you have to, but if you feel like you have to.
And dating's expensive as well. And like, and people go, oh, but the girl doesn't have to pay. And I'm like, I always offer, especially if I don't want to see them again, I 50-50 it. But it's not even that. It's getting to the date. It's the Ubers. It's the prep. Anyway, that was so on another, what is it? I digress.
I diversify.
I do actually. We can talk about that later. So we've got 2025 coming up. So what do you think are some of the biggest spending traps we're going to see? Obviously, like there's a lot on social media. We've got the cost of living crisis. There's that cost of FOMO. What do you think from what you're seeing and from the conversations you're having, what do you think are going to be those biggest traps?
I think that there's the ever-present traps, as we said, social media, you know, we're on social media more than ever. There's more stuff to buy. There's the, you know, the new year, new me aspect. And I think within that, there's this pressure to spend money to become the person you're supposed to be in 2025. Like, look, I love goal setting. I love the new year energy. Don't get me wrong. But something I've had to work on myself over the years is really separating that from consumption. Yeah. It is so tempting to be like, I'm going to get fit in 2025, so I'm going to go and buy, you know, I've always got this big joke about the mini arm weights. I've had so many sets of these fucking mini arm weights throughout my life. They're always in cute little colors. Yeah. And I think that it means that I'll do a little workout before bed, and I have never done the little workout before bed because I'm going to bed. There's this pressure to, you know, buy the journal, buy this, buy that, buy the new outfit for your new brand. And I think in sort of modern self-development rhetoric, dare I say, there's a bit of a trend of like doing what your higher self would do, dressing like your higher self. And I think as a concept, that makes a lot of sense. You know, show up as the person you want to be, like don't wait until you're somewhere. But I think that because we have just been so conditioned to consume, our instinct is always, I'm going to go and buy a new outfit then. I'm being my higher self today, so I'm going to go and buy a new outfit. Or I'm going to, you know, go and change my hair, or I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. I think that's one of the biggest things going into a new year is separating the goals that you have for yourself from the ways that you might spend your money and from consumption. I think there's this other trap, in terms of, particularly if you are wanting to get on top of your money and spending is a part of that, I always say there's kind of a multitude of demons that sit within the goals that we set. Yeah. And one of them is this overcorrection temptation. And we want to just kind of go, right, I'm not spending anything ever again, or I'm going to be better with money. Yeah. And it's very vague. But the idea of it we have is this like perfectionistic idea where we'll never buy anything we don't need ever again, or we'll never be tempted ever again. Yeah. And we're sort of sitting there on New Year's Eve or New Year's Day, kind of in that rational headspace. And we forget that our emotions are ever going to enter our brains ever again.
Yeah.
And we forget that we'll behave in an emotionally driven way. And so we set these goals as if we're a robot when we're not. And so I think that's really the delicate part of goal setting that is really the hard part, is actually setting goals and approaching them in a way that, you and your emotional self are actually able to uphold.
Yeah, absolutely. So what do you think the answer there is? Because I'm always very big on get the vision right, get what are you aiming towards? What are you working towards? Because as you said, just because it turns the 1st of January, if you haven't actually changed anything, nothing's going to change. If you're not changing your behavior, but you just have this thought, thinking is great, but it's actually the actions that make the difference. So, and I'm totally with you, because I'll speak to women and they'll be like, my New Year's resolution is to save more money. And I'm like, how much, what for, why? Let's break it down. Have you set up that automation from your bank account? So every time you get paid, it comes in. They're like, no, I just want to save more money. And I'm like, we need to put structure around that and a system to help you fulfill that. So what do you think the answer is? Is it being more realistic with yourself and just going for those smaller milestones? Or is it more just getting the bigger picture right and then working out how to get there?
Yeah, you're so right in, you've got to get the vision right. And I spent a year studying financial psychology. And one of the biggest things I remember from one of the lectures was a study that my two lecturers had actually run themselves. Yeah. They do a lot of kind of research in the space. And it was a study about savings rates. And they tested 2 groups. One took a financial literacy seminar. So your standard save for retirement. This is how much returns you could get. This is why you need to save money. And the other one was a financial psychology seminar where they talked about their goals and they bought something sentimental from home. And the savings rates on the second seminar were just astronomically higher. Yeah. But, there's some other, I guess, consequential factors as well that, require more research. But that on the surface really proves that you can know what to do in a rational sense. And you can have that goal of, however specific it is, whether it's as vague as spend less, as save more, or whether you have got, I want to save $10,000. That alone is not enough to change your behavior. So particularly if change is involved, and for many people there is a behavior change aspect to dealing with their finances, I think we need to be stepping it back and looking at what is driving our behavior. So our beliefs drive our behavior. So if we have beliefs around spending, well, I deserve to spend my money, I enjoy spending my money, while those things aren't necessarily incorrect, we need to build in the beliefs and the mindset that is going to drive the behavior that you want. Which is why I think it's really necessary, and I always get people to come into themselves when setting these goals for 2025 or any year, because you need to understand what behaviors you're currently engaging in and the mindset that is driving them to be able to work out, okay, well, what are the behaviors that I want to be engaging in? And as you said, the outcome. And then looking at the beliefs that are going to drive those behaviors and building those in, because our behavior and the things we experience create evidence that either uphold or dispute beliefs that we have. Generally, we're looking for evidence that is going to make it fit, that is going to uphold it. So when we know what beliefs and what behaviors are optimal, we can kind of trim both ends. So we can manufacture our behavior, and there's a lot of, effort that goes into that. And sometimes it is doing the thing you don't want to do and showing up when you don't want to, because you're kind of doing that a bit more manually at first. But that creates new outcomes that then serves to uphold the positive beliefs that then make that behavior your default setting. So at first you're going to be going, I don't want to save the money, or I want to buy that thing, but I'm going to save instead. And you're like, it's so much effort. I can't do this forever. But if you're working with the beliefs and the mindset piece as well, you're creating a financial experience and a financial narrative that eventually makes those beliefs drive those behaviors automatically. The other thing is, as you said, the vision. So we need to be looking at why. And I have this sort of laddering technique that I suggest for people when they're setting goals that helps with both the vision piece and the action piece. So whenever you come up with a goal, because we have a habit, I used to do this all the time, of just pulling an arbitrary number out of thin air and go, I want to have $10,000. And I'd go, well, why? And it's just, oh, well, because that will make me feel less ashamed of the fact that I don't have any savings. Like, you've just got this shame piece. Whereas what I get people to do is whatever they pull out, whether it is spend less, whether it is save $10,000, whether it is start investing, first question is why? And then you push it through the why ladder until you cannot go any further. So why 10,000? Oh, because I read somewhere that was a good idea. Okay, well, why is it a good idea for you? Push it until there are no more answers. And then with the same things, how? So how am I going to save $10,000? Okay, well, I'm going to spend less. Okay, how? Well, I should probably look at the money I'm spending during the workday. Okay, how? And then we get to the actual input, because we're so obsessed with the outcomes and the outputs, so the savings that we end up with. But what are the inputs that actually go into that? That's kind of where we need to treat that action piece as well.
Yeah, I love that. And I guess, do you have, because sometimes I find it easier to understand when there's like real life examples. And I know we've had LFC ladies come through, and I remember one story was she was really struggling to save, and it actually came back to her parents used to fight a lot about money. So she saw this money as like this really kind of almost dangerous, like it's going to bring unhappiness into my life. It was a source of such misery for so long. So she was just self-sabotaging. Like money would come in and she'd be like, okay, let me spend this as fast as possible. She'd even be like giving away to friends, like really interesting. And then once that was identified. So I guess, do you have any other kind of, I guess, case studies or stories or kind of people who've maybe been through your courses or have read the book where you've seen like them identify that or then start those new habits?
Yeah, there's so many commonalities in people's experiences. That's, you know, a lot of people have that same thing where money has caused conflict. You know, in my own life, I talk about this in the book as well. I found that having my own money and spending it was a real source of like independence for me. Like there was a lot of conflict in my family. I was an only child. I wanted to be out there being independent, and there was a sense of independence and control. So whenever I wanted to feel anything, I had this control of being able to spend. There was another piece for me, and this is a really common one that I see in other people as well, is this kind of, it can happen when you have quite a narrow financial perspective. If you haven't come from a family that's participated in things like investing or wealth creation, you can have quite a limited view of what money is actually for. And so you can think, well, if I'm not spending it, I'm only saving it. And kind of, if you haven't ever had a safety net, you kind of think you don't really connect to the actual emotional benefit of that. So that's a really big one. And another one is that people, and I relate to this myself, kind of feel like spending money is parting with money and saving money is parting with money, because they're not connected to where the savings will go or what it will be for or what it could be like to be able to have money. We kind of think, well, I don't have it anymore. So I can either exchange it for goods and services, or I can put it in my savings, which, you know, emotionally means nothing to me. So that's where we need that emotional piece as well.
I was going to say, and on that as well, that's so true, because I was speaking to a lady who worked in finance the other day, and I was like, how are you with money? And she's like, shocking, I'm so bad with money. I'm pretty ashamed as well because I work in finance. I said, no, that's okay. Like, you know, we hear that a lot. I said, well, what's your goal? What are you working towards? Like, she's like, nothing. And I'm like, well, I think that's part of the issue. Like, yeah, it's that there's just money in the savings account. It's not doing anything. There's no purpose for it. Like, you know, imagine, I always say, and my mentor says this as well, it's like, imagine playing a game of soccer without any goals. Like, you just kick your ball, it'd get really boring, you'd lose interest really quickly. And it's the same with like our money. For me, I was always had this thing in my head that I earn money to spend money. Like that's why we earn it. We earn it to spend it. I had no idea I could be setting myself up with some really strong foundations, and I made pretty much all the mistakes you could make.
Me too.
No regret. But, hey, you can't go back. All you can do is like go, okay, you know, what is it? I do better until I know better, then I do better. Okay.
Yeah, when I know better, I do better. Yeah.
Yeah. I've actually got the quote on my wall somewhere. I always stuff it up. I'm self-diagnosed dyslexic, so I'm always getting my words mixed up. Yeah, I was like, okay, time to put that aside, forgive myself, and move on.
I've done exactly the same things as you, and I had that same view. And when you don't, you know, when you haven't grown up around or you haven't been privy to this idea that, ooh, here's some money stress, here's the behavior that past me did to mitigate that. But within that, this, you know, you can also grow up being used to money just being stressful. And the more that you perpetuate that in your own life, the more of a tolerance you have for it. This is the thing that I kept repeating this pattern of every single payday. It used to be paid monthly when I lived in the UK. It's very common over there. every month I would say I'm going to be different next month. But then every single month that I wasn't different, or I was, changed my behavior for a week and then fell off the wagon again, every single time you find a way. You're still here. You find a way to pay that flat tire, whether you use credit, whether you take on an extra shift, whatever you do. I always found a way. And because at that point I was working shifts, so I could always take on extra shifts, or, back then we worked for tips in hospitality. So I would just take on a prime time shift and get more tips. And every time I survived. But what it did, it just created this comfort zone of like, oh, I'll work it out. I wanted to be different. Yeah. But if I wasn't different, well, oh well.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I was very similar when I was living in London. It felt very safe and normal to be always broke.
Yeah.
And when I remember that time I was working in a much higher paying job, and I probably could actually I knew I had enough to save. It was such a moment of growth and uncomfortableness to be like, I've got money in my bank account and I'm not spending it.
Yeah.
What the hell? And I think as well, because all my girlfriends were all the same, and we would all have this negative, I'm so broke, let's go out, woo, let's party, let's drink. But then when I started changing that small behavior, it was weird at the start, but then all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, I feel calm. I feel like if something happens, I don't have to call my sister or my mom or my dad.
Yeah.
And I'm and at that age, this was I was old. I was probably 28 at the time. And I was like, okay, this is actually probably what I should have been doing many, many years ago. But it took me that long to have that moment.
Yeah, and it can take a while for that to bake in too. You can start creating the changes and you have this big upward spike in your financial situation, I guess. You go from having £0 in the bank to, 200. But then you can, as you say, you get to this point where you're like, there's money there and I haven't spent it. And when all you know what to do is spend it, it can be a bit okay, what now? And you can actually have to work quite hard to, I guess, change your relationship with those savings and allow yourself to experience that stability when you have all this evidence that you'll find a way to survive flying by the seat of your pants. It's, we have a very natural, as humans, we have a very natural status quo bias. So no matter how desirable in theory it is for us to have savings, if we aren't familiar or we're not really connected to the benefit of having savings and the life that creates and the emotional stability that creates, we can, scurry back to what we know. It's kind of the same in relationships, when you can get a bit addicted to drama in relationships and get addicted to drama in money. Well, I'll just spend this and I'll fix it later. And it almost becomes that sabotage becomes something we become addicted to.
Oh, big time. Absolutely. And so for someone who's listening who might have maybe has a toxic relationship with money, or they're just I'm a hot mess when it comes to finances, but I'm ready for change. And I also find when people are I create this budget and then I just never stick to it. I'm always I play hard cop. I'm if you want to stick to it, you can do this, but you gotta want it. I guess, what do you say? Because that's a question we actually got from our audience to you, and we got it quite a few times as well. They'd be I create a budget and then I just don't stick to it.
Been there. Absolutely been there.
Same. Although I probably didn't even create a budget.
I was a big fan of what I call the napkin budget, where it would be scribbled down in a frenzy. And it would be right, if I pay that and I pay that and then I pay that, £20 for the next 11 days, that'll be fine. And it will bring this psychological relief for a little bit, but before long, you realize that that's not going to happen. And often when you put that much pressure on yourself, even if realistically, under perfect circumstances, you could last 12 days on £20, you've created such a pressure cooker that you're going to pop. You're not actually going to stick to that. So my first thing is, if you're not sticking to your budget, the budgeting approach is wrong. A budget is not a budget. It's not a budget. There are so many ways that you can do it. And I talk about this a lot in terms of, whether some people are a real hands-on zero-based budgeter, every dollar has a job. And, we're seeing a lot of explosion of this budget with me content on social media, which is great because it gets people talking about budgeting. But it does create, and I've seen this in my Facebook group, it does create this kind of narrative that the best way to budget is with this absolutely hardcore spreadsheet and there's pie charts and tabs like coming up the wazoo, and you're like, I can't do that.
No, when I see people do that, I'm like, I don't even know how to work this spreadsheet.
Exactly. And particularly if you've got ADHD, look, for some people, they hyper-focus and the ADHD makes them want to keep doing it. For other people, and this is particularly me, I will forget that the spreadsheet and I are even on the same planet. I won't input my spending, and then the whole thing's blown out. And then I feel like I have to wait to the next pay cycle to start again, which is what we don't want. And I'm not going to prescribe a budgeting strategy because everybody is different. Personally, I found success with they'd call it a reverse budget, or the pay yourself first. So you do the need to do's. So you put money into savings and you pay your bills and expenses. A big one within that, whatever budgeting strategy you're using, the only thing I will ever prescribe is streamline your expenses. I used to have this good fortnight, bad fortnight, where I was paid fortnightly. In one of the fortnights, my rent was due, my bills were due, my car insurance was due, so I had no money, and it was awful. So I was always borrowing from myself. At the second fortnight, nothing was due, so I spent all my money. I wasn't spreading it across. So I've got a free calculator I can put in the show notes if you like. Right. Input all your expenses and make sure that you're setting aside an equal amount from every payday if you are paid on a salary. Equal amount from every payday towards those bills, because that is going to take off. That's going to make sure that your requirements and your needs are met. And then everything else, whatever else you do, you can work on massaging your behavior to make that fit, knowing that you're not spending the money that you're meant to be putting towards your rent or your mortgage. So that's personally what I do. But the biggest thing with budgeting strategies is not relying on a cookie cutter strategy forever. It might work to get you started, and if it does, go nuts, but you've got to I always say the best budgeting strategies are ones that you cannot succinctly explain to someone else, because I've got my spontaneity account, I've got this, I've got my little, I have my margin for error, because I know that some weeks I will spend next to nothing, and other weeks I'll spend double what I'm supposed to, just because of the way my schedule is. So I have my margin for error so that averages out. But that's not in any, it's in my book, but it's not in any like prescribed budgeting strategy. So I always say to people, get to know your own behavioral tendencies. What are you like with other things? Are you a type A planner, or are you a bit of a, wing it and see how I feel person? A really good way to assess this is, what do you do when you're going on holiday? Do you have like hour by hour itinerary? Or do you just want to see how you feel? Often the way we are with that is the way we are with our budget as well. What do you like with food? What do you like with exercise?
Yes. I was going to say food, I find, is a good one as well.
Like I don't want to eat. And it's funny because I kind of manage my, food shopping and eating in a similar way to my budget. I plan and I've got enough meals for the week, but I don't say Monday, lasagna, Tuesday, tacos, because I might want tacos on Tuesday. I'm not telling myself that. So I'll have my meals, but I make sure that they're things that aren't super perishable so that I can mix it around. I probably order food. Well, I don't order food on the apps anymore. That's a whole thing. But I sometimes go to my local like Indian and pick something up. Probably do that once a fortnight-ish, but it's not like Saturday night takeaway. It's whenever I feel like it. Because it's that independence piece for me. I don't like rules. It's why I have to be self-employed, because I just can't stick to the rules.
I feel you there.
Yeah. So really just work out how you like to do things. We all get things done in the day. We all get our laundry done. We all brush our teeth. Some people like to do it at a set time on a set day. Some people like to have more autonomy. Start there. Yeah. And then try different things. Try the different budgeting strategies and see what is working.
Yeah. And remember as well, guys, if you're listening and you're like, oh, I've tried some, they say it does take like over 90 days to get it right. And also what works for me, I have a twin sister. It doesn't work for her. We're twins and we have completely different ways we manage our money. But as you said, I think it's about actually coming up with a system. And really, at the end of the day, all you're doing is telling your money where to go. So you're not going, where's it all going? What will happen to it?
Exactly.
All? Yeah. And I love how you say, with the pay yourself first. And it's literally like treating your savings like bills. So you're just putting that money away. Exactly. Like, okay, cool. I'd love to hear anyone's experience from doing that. And I get so intrigued with how people budget as well, because there's so many different ways. But I do really love how you say, like, there's not like one prescribed way, like this will work. I always love to teach like that there's, you don't have to have everything in the one account, because that's really confusing. So definitely have those different kind of fee-free accounts, but then, come up with a system that works for you. Something I do personally is I like to know every week how much I can spend on groceries. So I have my food account, and that's just like money that I, spend at Coles or Woolworths or Aldi. And for some reason, I just like to know that now. So again, it's coming up with your own little systems. So that kind of helps where we've got that person who's had that toxic relationship, and then they can step by step, and then they've got some ideas there for their budgeting as well. So,
one thing on that as well. I was just thinking then about if your budget's not working. I think just coming back to the piece we talked about earlier with your beliefs and your behavior being interconnected, the more times you try and quote unquote fail at a budget, that is creating this sort of negative relationship with the concept of a budget, which may be driving your behavior to buck the budget because you're like, well, maybe there's a fear of failure, or you just have this belief that they don't work. So I think potentially, however long this has been going on and what kind of relationship you have with budgets you've tried, thinking about, again, what kinds of behaviors do you need for the budget to work? What kinds of beliefs are going to enforce those behaviors?
Yeah. And so we've touched on it a little bit, Emma, but for those who are listening and might have just come across you, so you had a similar were you kind of like hot mess finance? Was that your starting point as well? And what was the turning point for you?
The turning point for me, it's funny, there was sort of a turning point. Everyone kind of goes, but what changed? Like, how did you go from being that person? And, everybody wants like the smoking gun, I'd say one of the first things that made me sort of realize, because I think for a really long time, as much as I wanted to be better with money, I didn't quite see how much I needed to. Because, you touched on it before, and I don't know if it's a UK thing or just that stage of life, but I honestly thought we were all in the same boat. Like, I thought we were all bad with money. I didn't really realize that anybody was any different. And again, that financial perspective, I didn't really know that it would ever change. Right now, I was stressed because I would spend my money on nights out and a coat from Topshop that I probably shouldn't have bought. But in my mind, I wasn't doing anything crazy wrong. I was like, well, this is just my stage of life. And then when I'm older, I've got more responsibilities, like money will be stressful in a different way. I didn't really see any different. It wasn't until I kind of got to my mid-20s and people started buying houses. And I was like, ooh. And don't get me wrong, there's aspects of probably help from parents and stuff there. But, it's not just you can't buy a house with just the deposit. You've got to have some kind of savings, evidence of savings, some kind of ability to manage money, even being emotionally comfortable with doing that. The way I describe that moment is, I don't know if anybody's ever watched Sex and the City, but there's this episode where Carrie's laptop gets just wiped of all of her work. She goes to the laptop store and everybody keeps asking her, like, when did you last back up your work? And she was like, no one is talking about backing up their work. Why are you now telling me you've all been backing up your work for years? That was how I felt with money. I was like, not one of you told me that you were saving money. Like, it's almost like we, particularly as women, I don't know if it's a female thing, we sort of cosplay being bad with money, even if we are saving a bit, because it feels like that's what everybody's doing. And don't get me wrong, I don't know if it's the same now with social media being a bit more, money being a bit more in the mainstream because of social media. But I definitely used to think that people that never really spent any money were boring. And, they're a bit tight. It's so annoying going out with her because she never wants to buy any drinks. Or she never pays for the taxi. Do you know what I mean? Don't get me wrong, there's a line, you got to pay your way. But that was kind of where my perspective started to change. But my behavior, I was still working on my behavior. It's such a long process. But I kind of thought, wow, I'm pretty far away from doing this. I'd also sort of realized that, I spent a lot of money that I had earned on kind of maintaining a long distance relationship. Thankfully, I married him, so it wasn't all for nothing. It was an investment. I left the UK a couple of years after I finished my studies. And because I was having this long distance relationship, I stayed working in hospitality rather than getting a graduate job. And I think I just sort of realized that I'd been, I don't want to say putting my life on hold, but I'd been very much living in the now. And I don't mean that in a lavish way. I wasn't doing anything fancy. I just wasn't thinking about my future self. And really what that prompted me to do was read, I can't even remember the first money book I read, but I just started reading these books. I'd found sort of the debt-free community on social media as it was back then. Very, personal diary type thing. And I'd started to go down the path of wanting to buy property and realizing this, great big hill it was to climb and thinking, oh God, this is, if only I'd been saving all of this time. And it just sort of gradually started to open my eyes to a new way of living almost, where it doesn't need to be super restrictive. I think I thought that when I did fix my finances, it would mean, never buying anything ever again and leaving this old life behind and having to be this really boring person and never having any fun. And so I never wanted to do it. But I sort of started to, I guess, emotionally connect to paying down my debt and noticing the benefit of that. And then kind of going, wow, I might earn not very much, but I can still put a little amount away every fortnight, and that builds up. And then, when I do go back to the UK for a friend's wedding or to see friends and family or whatever, it's not this great big stressful experience. I can save up for that throughout the year. Yeah. And I think it was almost like, this sounds really naff, but it was almost like I met my future self and decided to stop screwing her over. Yeah, it wasn't, I woke up one day, that's what everybody wants, and that's what we want with all change, because we've,
what was that?
We've been conditioned to have this overnight change, and the montage and the movie and everything's different. It was honestly just so gradual, and that change is still happening now. I'm still evolving, because I'm now at a point where I've got $50,000 invested in the share market. Nobody in my family's ever done that. I didn't know what investments were outside of, corporate investments. I didn't know that individual people could do that. And so now I'm having to, speaking to those beliefs and that psychology piece, is I'm really having to kind of calibrate my reality to everything I ever knew. I'm living, I'm working for myself, earned $100,000 last year for the first time at the ripe old age of 33. I never thought I would earn, and that in the grand scheme of things, that's not even that much above the average income now, but I never thought I would earn money like that. And if you're not sort of with your finger on the pulse about that stuff, you really have to calibrate where you're at with the mindset that that's been baked in there for all those years. Otherwise, you will get uncomfortable and sabotage. And the temptation, does come up sometimes.
And I think you really nailed then when you said, I'm still working on it. It's just small things. It's not this big dramatic change. I always say that to people, it's just small, consistent changes as opposed to these big life, oh my God, it's the new me, because that
no, it doesn't work with anything. No, it has to be a part of your life.
Yeah. So I guess to finish up, if someone's listening, what are maybe just 3 small actions, someone who's a bit of a hot financial mess and they're ready for that next step to level up, and even if it's just small things, what are 3 things that they can go off and do after listening to this?
First thing is let go of everything else that your brain feels like you want to do right now to change this, and just focus on awareness. So whether that is looking at your savings account, your credit card bill, your bank statements for the last however long, 3 months or something, just go on a data hunt. Just work out what it is that we're working with, because even people that are good with money, even myself, we will misattribute our financial behavior when we're not using the actual concrete data. We underestimate what we're spending. We might overestimate in another category. Just get aware of where your money is going and what the current situation is, what the behaviors are that you're engaging in, and the outcome that is creating. Step 1, just this is what I'm doing now, and this is the outcome that it's giving me. Second thing, we have the beauty of being at the beginning of a brand new year. So that's exciting. Think about, and this can take some time if you haven't done this before, but think about yourself in 1 year's time, and what could you do with your finances that would make your future self proud? Pride, I've found, is one of my most motivating emotions, I suppose it is. And what pride does is it creates momentum, and momentum creates ongoing behavior change. So that's really helpful. If you can think, how can I make myself proud? Would it be halving my debt? Would it be having $1,000 in savings? Would it be having an emergency fund? What would that look like? And really focus on making yourself proud rather than that mathematical thing, because that emergency fund really means nothing unless you're connected to what it's doing for you. And number 3 would be streamline your expenses. If you're not already doing it, it's such a boring one, but find a way to be putting an equal amount aside from every payday to cover your bills, using sinking funds for those bigger expenses, your car insurance, split it by the number of months between now and when it's due. Same with all your other bills, so that you're not having this really, you can't see it because it's on video, but I'm gesticulating this up and down. When it's up and down mathematically, it's up and down emotionally too. So that's that connection. Yeah.
And what I love about those 3 things are they are simple things to do. We're not rewriting like these big finance plans here. Those are three really simple, practical things to do that literally anyone can do. So I love that. And then final question I ask all my guests is, what are you reading at the moment, or have you read anything recently that you would recommend for the audience?
I am reading my advanced copy of my very good friend and podcast co-host Victoria Vivente. She's written a new book called Know Your Worth. She's an ex-financial counselor, so it's a really interesting take, some really, really meaningful stories in there about how people that have come to financial counseling or financial coaching, their relationship with money, big bits on shame, and how we can let go of that to ultimately embrace our worth. So that is what I'm reading at the moment.
Amazing. And shout out to financial counselors out there. I call them the angels of the finance world. If you are someone who is struggling with debt, it is a free service in Australia. There's a National Debt Helpline, and then there is also Money Care, Good Shepherd. There's a whole bunch of them out there that you can go check out. Emma, this has been so awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
And I'll pop all your links in the show notes. But if someone's like, oh my God, I need more of Emma right now, where can they find you?
You can find me on Instagram because I'm too old for TikTok. It's at the .broke generation. I'm there a lot. And also my book is called Good with Money, and it is bright yellow. You cannot miss it in the money section.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.